Biggest differences between working for a startup on the East Coast versus West Coast. For context, I've worked for multiple startups on the East Coast and multiple on the West Coast, always in food tech, which is just a novel way of creating food. Number one, all of my founders on the West Coast came from product or R&D backgrounds. On the East Coast, they've always come from engineering or business backgrounds. The way this really changes the startup is on the West Coast, because they're coming from a product background. I always find they're bringing in IP and like legal much earlier into the conversation to protect every single part of the product. Whereas on the East Coast, all of my startups have been really focused on how are we getting traction and launching the product to market ASAP. Similarly with that, West Coast, there has been a much better work-life balance. A lot of my managers there would check in to make sure I'm not burning myself out. They would ask me when am I taking vacation and using all of my PTO. On the East Coast, there was much more a culture of pinging back and forth after hours, like even late, 7, 8 p.m. Everyone I found would get there early to the office, leave late. I worked weekends for years. Like this was just kind of the norm. And even today, now that I'm back on the East Coast, the culture of working past 5 p.m. is very, very strong. Number two, really distinct communication styles between both. On the West Coast, in meetings and even in one-on-ones, people would not always say exactly how they felt. Whereas on the East Coast, people are saying exactly what they mean and are very direct. Neither is right, and both I can see the merit. I think on the West Coast communication style, you're checking in more and making sure the person feels okay about the plan and executing on the plan, and you're having to kind of manage these follow-up conversations on your own, and there's a lot more of them. On the East Coast, people might just be more sensitive towards the harshness and the directness as well, but that's probably happening behind the scenes or behind closed doors. Again, one isn't right or wrong. These were just generally what I noticed in communication styles between the startups I was at. Number three, generally I found startups on the East Coast have a much shorter tolerance for really long R&D cycles, whereas that's completely different on the West Coast. Obviously, this completely depends on the startup's funding and burn rate and what their goals are and what their product is, but just generally, I found that the tolerance for a little bit of a longer R&D cycle was higher on the West Coast. Okay, I love this topic, so I'm already going to do a part 2 pretty soon.